Hello and welcome back everybody. Today we're gonna talk about My Hero Academia chapter 195, and as we know from last chapter, Shinso has returned to the story and he will become somewhat important in this arc, I reckon, because he hasn't been seen for a while and now suddenly he's being thrown into this joint battle training between class 1A and class 1B. So I certainly do expect to see some great stuff coming from Shinso, and already in this chapter, although it's only the beginning of the arc, we're seeing some really interesting stuff. Honestly, like the way we saw Shinso use this mask, like the function of this mask was something that I really found to be a very interesting approach for Shinso, since his quirk doesn't directly help him to fight, much like Aizawa or someone like Toga, you know. There's gonna be quirks out there that aren't directly going to help you to become an offense type. Now, in those cases, there are ways to tackle this obstacle. Of course, you'd have to use equipment or something along those lines, maybe basic combat training or advanced combat training, depending on just how far you need that hand-to-hand combat to really reach. I think in someone like Shinso's case, it may actually need to be on quite a high level, simply because as we saw from his fight with Deku back at the sports festival, he wasn't really that physically capable. So I mean, he's probably gonna have to start with the basic level, but I do think he's gonna have to step it up a notch even after that point, because, well, his quirk only really works if someone responds to him. Like, that's the whole thing with his quirk, and if that fails, he's gonna have to find a way, you know, to fight without the quirk. I mean, the whole wrap that he has around his neck, you know, much like Aizawa, definitely helps him. We haven't seen him use it yet, but I do reckon we will soon. And I can't wait, honestly, because we have seen Aizawa use it. He's like a master with it because he's been using it for years and years, you know. He's probably been having it since he was at UA. But Shinso has probably not been using that for a very long time. I mean, we can definitely assume that he hasn't been using it for longer than the sports festival, because at that time he didn't have it, you know, he had no training with it, because at the time Aizawa hadn't started training him yet, but now he has. So we're going to be seeing some new stuff. Now, what I really want to talk about first is, of course, Class 1B and Class 1A breaking down into small teams to train against each other class-wise, meaning that, you know, there's not gonna be a team with both Class 1B and Class 1A members in it. So the teams are obviously being randomly distributed in their class. However, since most people in the class know each other's quirks, it definitely does help them more than if they were to actually mix with Class 1B, because then they would need to learn more about, you know, maybe Class 1B's quirks, and it might be hard to adapt to that instantly. So instead they're using, you know, yes, the members of their own class, with Shinso being the exception, but I'll get to that in a sec. And yeah, I think that just makes for a much better training session, at least this early on. Maybe we will see the mix later on. I don't really know. I mean, none of us do, but I kind of hope so. I mean, I do want to see some level of variation. It really depends if we're just gonna see one match of each team going up against each other, or if it's gonna, you know, progress even further than that or not. So as I said, Shinso is the oddball because he's part of neither of their classes, so he serves as an extra member in one team for Class 1A and one team for Class 1B. And immediately one thing that is being brought up is the fact that, you know, Shinso may be seen as a numerical advantage to whatever team he is placed in, but then you have another side saying, well, he could also be seen as a handicap simply because he's not used to hero training like the other students are. He is very new to this whole battle training, you know, he's been in the general department for a very long time and he's suddenly being put into a training session with two hero classes. So he's definitely out of his comfort zone apart from the training that he's had with Aizawa, but we don't know exactly what kind of training that has been. We can assume it's, you know, as I said, hand-to-hand combat, you know, he's probably learned how to use that wrap around his neck to some extent and his new equipment will help him, but we don't know how well he adapts to teams and how well he can fight in general, because this is combat training. I think his quirk alone is not gonna cut it. I think he is gonna have to use some some more tricks up his sleeve if he's going to be a reliable asset to whatever team he's in. And as we know, he is in the team of Tsuyu, Kaminari, Kirishima, and Koda on Class 1A's end. And that is something that's quite interesting, how he's not really placed with any of the sort of mainstream characters. Like, you don't have Bakugo, Todoroki, Deku, Ochako. You have very, I wouldn't say lesser characters, but certainly characters that haven't had as much screen time as some of the others. I mean, you could say Kirishima is the exception to that because he did have some quite good screen time during the internship arc when he was with Fat Gum and Tamaki. But apart from that, Kirishima hasn't really had much at all recently, and I'm really looking forward to see how this team is going to really go up against Class 1B right now. In Class 1B's case, when the team that Shinso was put into with Class 1B is also very interesting because not only is he on the same team as Monoma, who fucking loves Shinso for some reason. In fact, I've never seen Monoma actually appreciate someone like this before. Like, he's actually happy about Shinso training with them and especially being on the same team as him. Obviously, he is referring to the quirk that he's using because Monoma is a shady motherfucker and he wants to exploit that quirk against Class 1A. I mean, you just know it. You don't really have to think very deeply to understand that that is Monoma's goal in this. He doesn't really care about Shinso as a person. Maybe he will soon, because we haven't really seen the two of them interact yet, but we have seen from this chapter that Shinso isn't really interested in making friends. He just wants to become better. He wants to become good enough to actually fit into the hero course because that's the goal that he's having. He wants to become a hero, and the only way for him to become a hero is to actually perform well in this training and probably some other tasks afterwards as well. I mean, we don't really know how soon he's gonna actually be put into the hero course if he does pass whatever trials await him. And that team also happens to be facing the team that Deku is on, which consists of Mineta, Mina, Ochako, and Deku. And one thing that is being brought up in this chapter is that Deku is going to be having some kind of rematch with Shinso whenever those teams happen to be facing off. So that's going to be interesting because we're going to see a much more improved Deku versus a potentially much more improved Shinso, and we may see as how different their fight is going to be whenever that happens. Granted, it is a team effort, so someone could happen to, you know, interrupt their fight. But whether that's going to happen, I don't really know. I hope not in a way, because I do want to see like a sort of round two between these two characters, even if one of them happens to have a much more physically inclined quirk compared to the other. Now, what's really interesting about this chapter, when Shinso, Tsuyu, Kaminari, Kirishima, and Koda is competing against Class 1B, we actually see a very interesting approach from both teams, because Class 1A, they are trying to strategize, you know, find a way to really bring Class 1B down and, you know, win their match. Now, while they're doing that, Class 1B, they are actually sneaking up on Class 1A. So these two teams are having very different approaches, and we see how that kind of unfolds in this chapter, because Class 1A are actually very surprised when the Beast Quirk and Solid Air Quirk users are actually straight up rushing them while they are dozing off looking at Ibarra, because she's actually a distraction. For some reason, no one really picked that up, how she was, right, you know, right in the open, no one to protect her. She was just all on her own, you know. You'd think at least one of them would actually pick up on the fact that, you know, something's off, but I guess not. We obviously learned a little bit more about the Class 1B quirks in this chapter, like, I guess, not really any big details, but we did learn, for example, that the Solid Air Quirk user can actually isolate whoever is trapped within his air from sound, meaning that there will be no sound coming into this bubble and no sound can probably come out of it either. So it kind of serves as a prison that happened to be a perfect counter for Koda's quirk, because Koda can use, obviously he can call for animals to help him, but without any level of sound, there's nothing he can really do about that. So he was perfectly countered, and of course we had Shinso against the Beast guy, and well, things did not really go as I expected them to be honest. Like, I did not expect Shinso to be able to manipulate his voice through this persona code, as they call it, where he could impersonate someone else's voice and have them respond thinking it's the actual guy. And that is why Shinso was able to brainwash the beast guy. That is something that I found to be really fascinating, and some people may say that this is a rather broken power, but it's not really that broken when you think about it, because they probably need a recording of whoever's voice it is, right? He probably has to have it programmed into this mask. And in order for that to happen, you need a clear recording of the target at some point. Class 1B and Class 1A members, you know, that's not really difficult. They're part of the school. There's probably multiple recordings of them, and Aizawa has probably helped Shinso to have this being done so that he may have a much easier time adapting to being in a combat training session with these classes. In a real life situation, you know, if there was a villain threat, maybe this would not be as easy because he wouldn't have any villainous voices programmed in, unless there are some that we don't know about. Maybe we have some of the league members in there as well. I mean, I don't know. I don't think so, to be honest, but at the same time, I wouldn't be too surprised if they have like Shigaraki, maybe Muscular, and some of the other people that have been captured. But you know, in that sense, it's not really that important because they're captured, right? So there's not really much to do with it. But you get what I mean. Like, you likely need to program that voice in before it can be usable. It's probably not just on the fly kind of thing where you can just hear their voice and suddenly you can adapt to it. I don't think it's that simple. That would make the mask incredibly broken indeed. But maybe it does work that way. I don't know. I'm just saying I don't think so. And I honestly think that if it is as I described it personally, it would make for a much better piece of equipment simply because it is limited. Anyway, that's really all I had to say about this chapter of My Hero Academia, chapter 195. I'd love to know what you guys thought about this chapter. Did you like the way that they introduced Shinso's new techniques? And did you like what this arc is going to be based on what we've seen in this chapter, like this whole team versus team training? Personally, I do like that because I've wanted the Class 1A and Class 1B training to begin for quite a while. I've known about it since before the internship, and you know, I've been waiting for it since then. That's a long time ago. So yeah, I'd love to know what you think down below, as I said, and as always, if you did, be sure to Detroit smash that like button if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you haven't done so already. This has been Chaotic Plus, and remember everybody, Toga is waifu, Toga is Laifu.